Okay, let's get started. The first thing that we'll build is the Y-axis assembly for the printer. The Y-axis is the part that sits on the table and the bed moves forward and backward on it. To build that, we're going to need the two Y-ends, which are the large plastic pieces in the kit, as well as 12 each of the M5 by 10 millimeter screws and T-slot nuts. We'll need 4 of the linear bearings and the 2 aluminum extrusions for the Y-axis and the 2 smooth rods for the Y-axis. We'll use one of our stepper motors. These other parts, which are frame brackets that will hold this assembly to the next, and these 4 bearing holders. Now to start, get one of the Y-ends, it doesn't matter which one, and one of the smooth rods, and check to see if the smooth rod will slide easily into these round holes at the top. It should slide all the way in until it bumps against the back. If it doesn't slide in easily, which isn't unusual, then stop what you're doing, get a 8mm or a 5/16 inch drill bit and a drill, and you just want to clean these holes out. Just a little bit, just enough so that these will slide in easily. We don't want to have to force these rods in. A 5/16 inch bit isn't quite 8mm, so it may not quite do the job. And another thing you can do is get a small file. I have a set of these inexpensive diamond files that I use quite a bit for these kinds of projects. Clean that hole out, maybe just work on it a little bit. I really advise you to take your time on this step and make sure that these go in smoothly. You should be able to push them in just with your bare hands. If you're needing anything more than that, then the holes probably just aren't quite big enough. And we don't really need the holes to be tight on these rods because we're not using these rods for any of the frame rigidity. So it's okay if they're loose. Don't be worried about that. Once those seem good, do the same check with the extrusions. Check that it slides in like that, bottoms out all the way to the bottom. This one's still a little bit tight, and you can always use a small hammer if you need to just tap straight in, or straight down rather, to seat those. It's not really preferable because once you start tapping it into place, you're not going to get it back out. So if you get halfway in and then you decide that you want to start over, then you could have some trouble. It's just hanging up just a little bit on something. Also, it's hard to push with this out in front of me. So if we wanted to, we could just take a little hammer, tap. Make sure you're going straight down. That extrusion wasn't quite bottomed out either, so that's good. Now once these are in here, be real careful that you don't start pulling and twisting on this because there's a lot of leverage on these rods on this plastic piece. Now the next thing is we will get the T-slot nuts and we will put 2 on this outer slot, 2 on the bottom slot, and 2 on the inner slot. And then same thing on the other side. Then get the 4 linear bearings and put 2 on each rod. Okay. Then get your other Y end, and you would have wanted to check the same thing with the rods and the extrusions on this one separately before you started putting them together. Because once it's on here, then it can be, you have to line up all 4 at once. I already checked these. Hopefully, again, just pressing in with both hands is all it'll take. If you want, you can tap it a little. Just tap right against the ends of those rods so that you're not putting any stress on the plastic. You're just going straight down. And then we'll take the M5 by 10mm screws, and we'll put 1 in each nut. So just line each nut up, jiggle it around until you can get to them, and then push them into place. And then we don't want these tight right away, so what I'll do is I get a Phillips, just a Phillips driver from the drill, and I use those just to help me turn those in. Okay, now with those just finger tight, get your ruler and check on each side that that this distance is the same. So I'm measuring from the inside of the parts. On mine, that's 342mm. If you're building off the standard bomb, yours will probably be a little bit more than that. And that looks right. If one of your extrusions was slightly shorter than the other, then it might be pushed in at this point. So if that's true, you just want to work it out so that they're the same. If everything is perfectly the same length, then you don't have to worry about that. But that way your frame won't be cockeyed. It'll be nice and true. So once you're happy with that, just tighten these down. Nice and snug, but don't overdo it and crack something. These inside ones might be easier to reach with a right angle screwdriver like this. Also easier to turn in the correct direction. Okay, so it's starting to look good. Next, next turn it over. Almost forgot a step. And get those 4 nuts out where you can see them. They're on the bottoms. And these frame brackets will attach to them. When these are on in the right direction, they'll face each other like a clamp. That's what's going to hold this assembly to the upright part of the assembly. So take the driver again and just tighten those loosely so that they still slide. Now get the 4 bearing holders, and you'll need 8 small zip ties, and thread 2 of them through each one. And now these 4, one goes on each of our bearings, and what you can do is just put them under so that you can reach everything, and then secure each one of these zip ties. Alright, so there's those. Just like that. Okay, next up, find your sheet of MDF. This should be approximately square. Mine is square. This is what the print bed will mount to, and we're going to assemble it onto here now. Scooch this back and get your straight edge and a pencil. And this, you can see the y-axis here. Again, this is the idler end and this is the motor end. From the idler end, what we're going to do is mark where these bearing holders should go. So from the idler end, we want the holders to be about 80 millimeters from the edge. So we'll just mark a couple of marks, draw a line. And then from the other edge, from the motor side, we want the bearing holders to be right up close to the edge. So I'm going to put a line that's 10 millimeters away from this side. Okay. Then flip the y-axis back over and pivot the bearing holders around until they're all flat like this against the bed, and line them up so that the outside of each holder is against one of the lines. And the reason it's set back so far on this side is that's what's going to allow the print bed to move out in front of the printer more. When it gets to the back of the printer, it'll actually hit the end stop, so we don't need it to go that way. And turn this around, and you want this more or less centered left to right, and you can just kind of eyeball that. Okay, and take your pencil once you're happy with everything and just mark the center of each hole on each side. The holes on the bearing holders are slotted intentionally so that if your drill doesn't end up in exactly the right spot, it won't bind up when you try to tighten it. So with those marked, put this aside. Now get your drill, and what I have here is a 13/64 inch drill bit, which is about 3.5 millimeters. You could probably use a 1/8 or a 3/16 bit. You want something that's, you know, just a little bit bigger than 3 millimeters. Take that and just drill each hole. I'll do that now. Okay, I'm back and I've got my 8 holes drilled here in the MDF, and now we're ready to attach it onto the print bed. So let's see the best way to do this. Make sure you got, now you can see the holes on the top. The holes that are set back will go on this side. The holes that are close to the edge will go on this side. You want 8 M3 by 14 millimeter screws and 8 M3 lock nuts to assemble the MDF. And I use lock nuts here specifically because I found that as the printer prints a lot, this jiggles, and regular hex nuts will loosen up over time and it'll start to shift the print bed around. So I recommend you use a lock nut. And then just put screw down through each holder. Just start anywhere. Hold this on the bottom. Just get that one started. Move on to the next one. Okay, so you can see here we've got one started now in each one, and now I'm just going to go around, do all the rest of them. And then I'll, you can see how this has a lot of slop when it's loose. As you get them closer to tight, just keep this lined up and keep it as square as possible with the ends. Okay, so there's that. The 8 screws are mounted in place and the print bed is nice and secure now. It should slide easily back and forth. It'll stop, actually it's going to hit right here, that's the end on the motor, and then it should slide out over the idler end. And now that that's on, we will put on the Y-axis motor and belt and idler. So to start, get the motor, and I have all the parts already collected for this segment. But get 4 M3 by 10 millimeter screws. Roll this aside for just a second, and we'll attach the motor. I'm going to drape the wires off to the left of the printer because the electronics will end up over here. If the slots here are a little bit too tight for the screws to fit easily through, then use the same drill bit that you used for drilling the holes in the MDF and just clean those out. If you're assembling your frame and you don't have your electronics and motors yet for some reason, then you can always come back and do this part later. But I found that it was easier to do all of the Y-axis before it's assembled onto the rest of the frame. I'll get the pulley that is used for the y-axis, and it should slide down here. Oops, the set screws need to be turned out, so get a whatever the correct Allen wrench is for your pulley. There you go, and just slide that on so that the top of the motor shaft is flush with the pulley, and then just enough so it doesn't fall off. Tighten it down. If your motor has a D-shaped shaft, which is really preferable, this one doesn't, make sure you align one of the set screws with that, and it'll be much less likely to ever slip. Okay. Now while we're on this side, we can attach the end stop. This is the Y end stop, so this is what will tell the controller that the print bed has moved all the way to this side. So it's just a simple mechanical switch. It's called a snap action switch because it has this little lever, and it just needs to go on this mount. This mount will also take other types of limit switches, like these big ones. Actually, they go on this side, and there's a few different hole patterns for different ones here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point it so the lever is up, and I'm just going to find actually first I'm going to feed the wires down through the bottom, and I might have to bend this around a little bit. Hopefully the wires won't break off. Now be aware of how far the lever extends on your switch. Some extend way past the switch and some don't go all the way to the end of the switch. But the print bed is going to strike right at the top of this end, at the plastic. So just get it in about right spot. We can test it. Yeah, hopefully you can see the MDF there. Just closes the switch, and you know that switch would probably stay put on its own, but I have these M2 by 16mm screws that are just right. Slip through these holes. Just have to line it all up. M2 nut, which is really hard to handle. Even worse than an M3. And there's no reason for that to be extra tight. And I have another one. Guess I could try to slip it through the other hole. Looks like it lines up. Really hard to get on there. Okay, now that's not going anywhere. now we can put on the idler, and the idler is a 624 bearing with an M4 by 20 millimeter screw and an M4 nut and a small plastic bearing guide, which is 2 parts. So the bearing should just go in there, it should snap in, and the other side just snaps on. That's all there is to it. This should be the same width as your belt, or a little wider than your belt, which here is my belt. Should just fit right on there. That's what keeps the belt from slipping off the side. So turn this over, and right here on the idler, down on this lower part that sticks up, is a slot for this M4 screw, or nut rather, and it should slide down into there. You might have to give it a nudge with your pliers. Some people will even, popular solution to this problem is to take a soldering iron and just gently warm that nut, and then take your pliers and it'll just push right down into place, and it'll never go anywhere. But shouldn't need to do that. It is kind of a tight fit. The file might have helped out there if I'd cleaned that a little bit. There. It should slide in enough that then just put the idler in there, slip the M4 screw in from the top, and if all goes well, it should find its way to that nut. This might have been easier to do before I put the MDF on, now that I think about it. Okay. And that doesn't have to be tightened. It really just is there to keep that from falling out if you tip it upside down. And then find your belt, which, again, this is mine. It's a GT2 belt. If your belt is in one long piece at this point, don't cut it. Just cut it after we get it in place. And then you won't end up with a little bit not enough on one or the other. So turn this over and just run the belt around the bearing, the idler bearing. On the other side, around the motor. Okay, so just to see what this is going to look like, and then bring the two ends somewhere around the center of the deck. So there, that's where that's going to go. And then find this piece. This is the Y belt holder, and you'll need 2 M3 by 30 millimeter screws and regular M3 nuts. You don't need lock nuts for this one because there are little traps built into the part. So what we want to do is turn the belt holder around so that the teeth on the holder will mesh with the teeth on your belt, and just slide the belt down in there, and you see how that kind of holds on there. You want the belt holder to be somewhere inside, in between the bearing holders, not way over here. So just find a spot, it's not that important, where, and pull the belt tight, and notice how it'll kind of pulls that right to the correct spot. So with this held tight with one hand, mark down through those two holes with your pencil. just put a little point, and then we can see where to drill. Make sure I got those. By holding the belt tight while you do that, you'll make sure that when the motor is pulling the bed around, it's not pulling from the side, it's going to pull straight. And just scooch this over. And actually, I'll need to remove this entirely so that I can get this up and drill it. Get the same drill bit you used before. Okay. Put the two M3 by 30mm screws up from the bottom. Again, use a washer if you need one. You can set that down over there. And just thread these two nuts on. Once they're on loosely, tip it up to the side and just do that so the nuts now are down in the bottoms of those cavities. Now they shouldn't be able to turn. Okay, that's nice and tight. Now take the belt back off and flip it around so that the continuous side is not inside but just to the side. Thread it back around the motor so it should be on the pulley. And get about just enough of this loose end so that you can put it through there and then tuck it back around to the side like that. I'll go back around the idler. Pull it tight. Tight as you can do it. Slip that into that side. Now check that your belt isn't twisted. Didn't quite get that. I need a little bit more room. This is why you don't want to cut your belt before you start. Since mine's already been trimmed, I have to have this lined up just right. Okay, real tight. Hold it. There. It's still not quite enough. Needs to meet, needs to be able to touch itself after it wraps around here. get some zip ties. I use these little 4-inch miniature ones. And wrap that around the belt so that the end of the belt is, the teeth of the belt are going to actually hold against the other side of the belt so that it can't slip. And even if the teeth inside the plastic part didn't hold it, that's going to prevent it from loosening up. And on your belt, if it hasn't been cut yet, you should have lots of extra belt. So wrap it around again, tighten that, really pull it tight. Mine is just a little too short to make it all the way over to here on this side. So rather than have to start over with a new belt, I'm just gonna kind of fudge it. I'm gonna take the loose end of this side and go around here, get another zip tie, and I'm gonna zip tie it to the other side. It's not as ideal. But sometimes we have to adapt. There we go. And get scissors or wire trimmers and just trim these off nice and short. So the belt should be, you know, pretty tight at this point. Now when we slide the bed, the whole belt should move. Alright, and that's our Y-axis.